The galloping hooves of Edward Kinsley's horse echoed through the Montana Valley as he fled, leaving behind nothing but dust and broken promises. Elizabeth Kane stood frozen on the porch of the small cabin, her wedding dress muddied at the hem, watching as the man she'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry disappeared over the horizon with her dowry money and every shred of hope she'd carefully cultivated during the long journey west. The year was 1878, and Elizabeth Eliza, to those who knew her, had arrived in Cottonwood Springs just yesterday, exhausted but excited to begin her new life. The letters from Edward had painted such a beautiful picture: a thriving ranch, a comfortable home, and a man eager to build a life with her. None of it was true. "Miss, you all right there?" Eliza turned to see a tall figure approaching on horseback. She quickly wiped her tears, embarrassed to be found in such a state. The man dismounted, his movements fluid despite his impressive height. He removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair and concerned blue eyes set in a face weathered by years under the western sun. "I'm fine," she lied, her Boston accent still crisp despite weeks on dusty trains and stagecoaches. "Pardon my saying so, madam, but you don't look fine." He kept a respectful distance. "Name's Benjamin Daniels. Most folks call me Ben. I ranch north of town." Eliza straightened her spine, summoning what dignity remained. "Elizabeth Kane. I was supposed to be married today." Understanding dawned on Ben's face. "Kinsley?" When she nodded, he cursed under his breath. "Sorry, madam. That snake's done this before." Fresh tears threatened. "What?" "Mail order brides. Brings 'em out, takes their money, disappears. Sheriff's been trying to catch him at it, but—" He gestured helplessly at the empty horizon. Something inside Eliza crumbled. All those months of correspondence, the journey west, the hope for a new beginning after losing her family to influenza, all of it built on lies. "He broke my hope," she whispered, the words barely audible. Ben stepped closer, his expression softening. "Then I'll build it again." The words hung between them, surprisingly bold yet sincere. He cleared his throat, seemingly startled by his own declaration. "What I mean is, you shouldn't let the likes of Kinsley make you think poorly of everyone out here. Plenty of good folks in Cottonwood Springs." He gestured toward town. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" Eliza shook her head. "The stage doesn't come through again for 4 days. I've got $3 hidden in my boot and nothing else." Ben nodded thoughtfully. "Mrs. Wilson runs the boarding house. She's fair-minded and could probably use help with cooking and cleaning in exchange for a room until you decide what you want to do." "I can't go back east," Eliza said, more to herself than to him. "There's nothing for me there anymore." "Then you'll make something here." Ben replaced his hat and offered his arm. "May I escort you to town, Miss Kane? It's nearly 2 miles, and those shoes weren't made for walking Montana dirt." Eliza hesitated only briefly before accepting his arm. What choice did she have? "Thank you, Mr. Daniels." As they walked toward his horse, she looked back at the shabby cabin, nothing like the handsome homestead Edward had described in his letters. Another lie among many. "Don't worry about your trunks," Ben said, following her gaze. "I'll send one of my ranch hands to collect them later today." Ben helped her mount his horse, then led it by the reins toward town, walking alongside. Eliza sat stiffly at first, unaccustomed to the western saddle and acutely aware of her predicament. Penniless, abandoned, and dependent on the kindness of a stranger in a frontier town where she knew no one. "Have you lived here long, Mr. Daniels?" she asked, desperate to fill the uncomfortable silence. 8 years. Came west after the war with nothing but determination and a bad leg. Got lucky with my land claim. Worked hard. Built something decent." He glanced up at her. "It's not easy, but there's opportunity here for those willing to work for it." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Eliza said. "My father was a bookbinder. I helped in his shop since I was old enough to thread a needle." That's a useful skill out here. Not many with the patience for fine work. As they approached Cottonwood Springs, Eliza took in the dusty main street lined with wooden buildings. A far cry from Boston's brick and cobblestone, but there was something appealing about its straightforward functionality. People nodded to Ben as they passed, eyeing Eliza with undisguised curiosity. Word travels fast in small towns, Ben explained apologetically. By sunset, everyone will know Edward Kinsley has struck again. Eliza's cheeks burned with humiliation. Wonderful. Don't fret about it. Folks here will blame him, not you. You're hardly the first woman he's deceived, though I hope you'll be the last. The boarding house was a two-story clapboard building with a small front porch. Ben helped Eliza dismount before tying his horse to the hitching post. Mrs. Wilson is stern but fair, he said quietly as they approached the door. Let me do the talking at first. The landlady was a broad-shouldered woman with gray streaked hair pulled into a severe bun. Her expression softened slightly at the sight of Ben. Mr. Daniels, what brings you to town on a Tuesday? Cattle drive's not for another month. Mrs. Wilson, this is Miss Elizabeth Kane. She's had some trouble and needs lodging. The landlady's eyes narrowed as she assessed Eliza's disheveled wedding dress. Kinsley? Ben nodded. Mrs. Wilson sighed heavily. That man ought to be horsewhipped. Come in, child. Let's get you settled. Inside, the boarding house was simple but immaculately clean. Mrs. Wilson led them to a small parlor and gestured for Eliza to sit. I have a room available, but I run a respectable establishment, she warned. Miss Kane is a lady in unfortunate circumstances, Ben said firmly. She's willing to work for her keep until she decides her next move. Can you cook? Mrs. Wilson asked Eliza directly. Yes, madam, and sew, clean, keep accounts. I could use help with the meals and mending, room and board in exchange for work, plus $2 a week. It wasn't much, but it was something. Thank you. That's very generous. Mrs. Wilson nodded briskly. I'll show you to your room. You can start by helping with supper. As the landlady turned to lead the way, Ben touched Eliza's elbow lightly. I'll have your trunks brought here before evening. And Miss Kane? His blue eyes held hers steadily. Don't let today define your opinion of Cottonwood Springs. Or yourself. Thank you, Mr. Daniels, Eliza said, genuinely touched by his kindness. I won't forget your help. Welcome to Montana, Miss Kane. He tipped his hat and departed, leaving Eliza to follow Mrs. Wilson upstairs. The room was tiny but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and small window overlooking the street. Eliza sank onto the bed, exhaustion and emotion finally overwhelming her. Rest for an hour, Mrs. Wilson said, her voice softening slightly. Then come down to the kitchen. We serve supper at 6 sharp. Alone at last, Eliza allowed herself to cry for her foolishness, for her lost savings, for the future that had evaporated in the Montana dust. When the tears finally stopped, she washed her face, changed into the only other dress she had accessible until her trunks arrived, and squared her shoulders. She had survived losing her parents and younger brother to influenza. She had survived the journey west. She would survive this too. With determined steps, she headed downstairs to begin her new life, unexpected and unplanned as it might be in Cottonwood Springs. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of baking bread. Mrs. Wilson handed Eliza an apron without preamble. 6 boarders for supper tonight, plus us. Stew's on the stove, bread's nearly done. You can start by setting the table. For the next hour, Eliza worked alongside Mrs. Wilson, grateful for the distraction of physical labor. The boarders, 4 men and 1 other woman, arrived promptly at 6, each regarding Eliza with varying degrees of curiosity. Mrs. Wilson made no introductions, and Eliza was thankful for the reprieve from explanations. After cleaning up from supper, Eliza stepped onto the back porch for a breath of fresh air. The Montana sunset painted the sky in spectacular hues of orange and pink, silhouetting the distant mountains. Despite everything, she couldn't help but be moved by the wild beauty surrounding her. First sunset in Montana? Eliza turned to find a young woman about her own age standing in the doorway. She'd been introduced at dinner as Miss Martha Reed, a schoolteacher. Yes, Eliza admitted. It's quite beautiful. It never gets old, Martha said, joining her at the railing. I've been here 3 years, and each sunset still takes my breath away. You're not from here originally? Martha shook her head. Ohio. Came out to teach after normal school. Best decision I ever made, though my mother still writes weekly begging me to return to civilization. She smiled warmly at Eliza. Mrs. Wilson mentioned your situation. I'm sorry about Mr. Kinsley. Eliza tensed, prepared for judgment. The same thing happened to my friend Clara last year, Martha continued. She ended up marrying the blacksmith 3 months later. They're expecting their first child this winter. I'm not looking for another husband, Eliza said firmly. Of course not. I just meant that things have a way of working out, even when they seem hopeless. Martha touched her arm gently. If you need anything clothing, company, someone to show you around town, please ask. We women need to support each other out here. Eliza felt a knot in her throat loosen slightly. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I need to prepare tomorrow's lessons. Good night, Miss Kane. Eliza, please. Eliza. I'm Martha. Sleep well. As darkness fell, a wagon arrived with Eliza's trunks, delivered by one of Ben Daniels's ranch hands as promised. Mrs. Wilson helped her carry them to her room, where Eliza unpacked her few treasured possessions: her parents' photograph, her mother's silver hairbrush, a small collection of books, and her clothes and linens, a pitiful inventory of a life left behind. She fell into an exhausted sleep that night, dreaming of Edward Kinsley's retreating figure and Ben Daniels' steady blue eyes. The next week passed in a blur of work and adjustment. Eliza quickly proved her value to Mrs. Wilson, whose initial sternness gradually softened into something approaching warmth. The boarders, Mr. Thompson, the bank clerk, Mr. Hayes, the telegraph operator, Dr. Collins, Mr. Fernsby, a traveling salesman who stayed when in town, and Martha were all respectful and friendly. On Sunday, Martha invited Eliza to accompany her to church services, where she was introduced to what seemed like the entire population of Cottonwood Springs. Most people were welcoming, though Eliza noticed a few women eyeing her with suspicion. Don't mind them, Martha whispered as they took their seats. Some folks are just naturally distrustful of newcomers. After the service, as they stood chatting with a group of Martha's friends, Eliza spotted a familiar tall figure across the churchyard. Ben Daniels was deep in conversation with the sheriff, but as if sensing her gaze, he looked up and tipped his hat in her direction. Eliza nodded in acknowledgement, surprised by the small flutter in her chest. Mr. Daniels rarely comes to town except for supplies, Martha observed with a knowing smile, unless he has other reasons. He was kind to me when I arrived, Eliza said neutrally. Nothing more. If you say so. Martha's tone was teasing. Though he's considered quite a catch. Built his ranch from nothing, now runs 500 head of cattle, lost his wife in childbirth 4 years ago. The baby, too. Eliza's heart constricted at this revelation. How awful. Indeed. He kept to himself for a long while after. This past year he started coming to town more regularly. Some say he's finally healing. Before Eliza could respond, Ben approached them, hat in hand. Miss Kane, Miss Reed, he greeted them. Fine morning. Mr. Daniels, Martha replied with a bright smile. We were just discussing the Harvest Festival next month. The school children are preparing a musical performance. I'm sure it will be excellent. His eyes shifted to Eliza. How are you settling in, Miss Kane? Quite well, thank you. Mrs. Wilson has been very kind. Glad to hear it. He hesitated, then continued. Actually, I came to ask if you might consider a position at my ranch. Eliza blinked in surprise. I beg your pardon? My housekeeper, Mrs. Potts, is expecting her first grandchild in California. She's leaving next week to help her daughter. I need someone to cook and keep house. He hurried to add, it's a respectable position. Mrs. Potts has her own cabin near the main house. The pay is $15 a month plus room and board. $15 a month was far more than she was earning at the boarding house. Still, Eliza hesitated. It's 5 miles from town, Ben continued, but my ranch hands come to town most Saturdays. You could ride with them if you wished. I'm not sure, Eliza began. Think about it, he said. No need to decide now. I'll be in town until tomorrow afternoon. After he'd walked away, Martha raised her eyebrows. Well, that's interesting. It's just a job offer, Eliza said firmly. Of course, a well-paid job offer from an eligible widower who rode 5 miles into town, dressed in his Sunday best, specifically to speak with you. Don't be ridiculous. He needs a housekeeper. Martha smiled knowingly. What will you do? Eliza bit her lip. I don't know. Mrs. Wilson has been so kind to me. She'd understand. You can't turn down an opportunity like this out of obligation. Besides, she'll find another helper. That evening, Eliza discussed the offer with Mrs. Wilson, who, to her surprise, encouraged her to accept. Daniels is a good man, runs a clean operation. You could do worse for an employer. The older woman patted her hand awkwardly. You've got a good head on your shoulders, girl. Trust your instincts. By morning, Eliza had made her decision. She found Ben at the general store, purchasing supplies. Mr. Daniels, I'd like to accept your offer. His face brightened. That's fine news, Miss Kane. When can you start? Mrs. Wilson has asked for 3 days to find a replacement. That's fair. I'll send a wagon for you and your things on Thursday morning. As she turned to leave, he added, Miss Kane, thank you. I think you'll find the Bar D a pleasant place to work. Thursday dawned clear and cool. Eliza said her goodbyes to Mrs. Wilson and the boarders, promising Martha she'd return for Sunday services whenever possible. The wagon arrived mid-morning, driven by a weathered man in his 50s who introduced himself as Hank, the ranch foreman. Boss speaks highly of you, miss, he said as he loaded her trunks. Says you're a hard worker. He hardly knows me, Eliza pointed out. Hank chuckled. Ben Daniels is a good judge of character. Has to be. In this country. The journey to the Bar D Ranch took nearly 2 hours along winding trails that climbed into the foothills. As they crested a rise, Eliza gasped at the vista spread before her, a broad valley cradled by mountains, with a creek winding through verdant pasture land dotted with grazing cattle. Near the center stood a large log house with several outbuildings and corrals. That's the main house, Hank explained, pointing. Bunkhouse over yonder for the hands. That small cabin by the cottonwoods will be yours, Mrs. Potts's place. It was far grander than Eliza had imagined, certainly nothing like Edward Kinsley's dilapidated shack. It's beautiful, she said honestly. Ben built most of it himself. Man works from sunup to sundown. Always has. As they pulled into the yard, Ben emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. He wore a simple flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms browned by the sun. Welcome to the Bar D, Miss Kane. He helped her down from the wagon. I hope the journey wasn't too tiring. Not at all. Your land is magnificent, Mr. Daniels. He ducked his head, seemingly embarrassed by the compliment. It's good country. Let me show you to your cabin. The small structure was clean and cozy, with a bedroom, sitting area with a small stove, and a covered porch. Windows on both sides let in ample light. Mrs. Potts left everything in order, Ben said. The main house has the kitchen where you'll prepare meals, breakfast at 5, dinner at noon, supper at 6. Usually 7 to feed, including yourself, me, Hank, and 5 hands. More during roundup and branding. I understand. Sundays are yours to do as you please. Hank or one of the boys can drive you to town for church if you wish. Eliza nodded, already feeling overwhelmed by the changes in her circumstances. Just weeks ago, she'd been preparing to be a wife. Now she was a housekeeper on a remote cattle ranch. Ben seemed to sense her unease. It's a lot to take in, I know. Take today to settle in. Mrs. Potts prepared a stew before she left enough for today's meals. You can start fresh tomorrow. After he left, Eliza unpacked her belongings, arranging her few treasures to make the cabin feel more like home. The space was simple, but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and colorful quilts. Through the window, she could see men working with horses in the corral, their voices carrying faintly on the breeze. This would be her world now, so different from the bustling streets of Boston, or even the small town of Cottonwood Springs. She wondered if she'd made the right choice. That evening, she walked to the main house to serve the stew Mrs. Potts had prepared. The ranch hands, Tom, Charlie, Miguel, Silas, and young Jimmy, barely 18, filed in, washing up at the pump outside before taking their places at the long table. They were polite, but reserved, clearly curious about her, but too respectful or shy to ask questions. Ben sat at the head of the table, thanking Eliza as she served him. Mrs. Potts left her recipe book on the kitchen shelf, he said. Might be helpful until you get your bearings. The meal passed with discussion of ranch business fences needing repair, a mare about to foal, plans for the approaching winter. Eliza served quietly, observing the easy camaraderie among the men. It was clear they respected Ben, who listened to their concerns and suggestions with genuine interest. After cleaning up the kitchen, Eliza walked back to her cabin under a vast canopy of stars. The night was silent except for the distant lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind through cottonwood leaves. She'd never seen stars so bright, or felt so small beneath them. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her that night. She lay awake thinking of all that had changed in such a short time. Edward Kinsley's betrayal still stung, but it was fading, replaced by determination to build something new. Ben Daniels's words echoed in her mind. Then I'll build it again. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps hope, like many things, could be rebuilt. The following week settled into a rhythm. Eliza rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the men, who arrived hungry and appreciative of her efforts. She spent mornings cleaning the main house, afternoons baking and preparing the evening meal, with time in between for mending and laundry. It was hard work, but satisfying in its simplicity. Ben was often gone from sunrise to sunset, working alongside his men. When their paths crossed, he was unfailingly polite, asking about her comfort and needs, but maintaining a respectful distance. Sometimes she caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unreadable. One evening in late September, nearly a month after her arrival, Ben knocked on her cabin door just after sunset. "Miss Kane, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Mr. Daniels." She stepped aside to let him enter, suddenly conscious of her simple surroundings. He removed his hat, holding it awkwardly. "I wanted to thank you for the care you've been taking with the men's meals. They've noticed the difference." "It's my job," she said simply. "Still, it's appreciated." He glanced around the cabin. "Are you comfortable here? Is there anything you need?" "I'm quite comfortable, thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. Ben cleared his throat. "I also wanted to let you know we'll be driving some cattle to the railhead next week. Hank and I will be gone for about 10 days. The other hands will remain to look after things here." "I understand." He hesitated, then added, "There's a harvest festival in town the weekend after we return. The whole ranch usually attends. You'd be welcome to join us." "That sounds lovely. Thank you. He nodded, replaced his hat, and moved toward the door. Well, good night then, Miss Kane. Mr. Daniels? She called as he stepped onto the porch. May I ask you something? He turned back. Of course. Why did you help me that day, when Edward left me? His expression softened in the lamplight. Because everyone deserves better than to be abandoned in a strange place, and because I know what it's like to have plans for the future suddenly vanish. Eliza thought of what Martha had told her about his wife and child. Yes, I suppose you do. Good night, Miss Kane. Good night, Mr. Daniels. After he left, Eliza sat for a long while on her porch, listening to the night sounds and thinking about the quiet man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. The cattle drive departed early the following Monday. Eliza rose before dawn to prepare a hearty breakfast for the men who would be making the journey. As Ben mounted his horse, he tipped his hat to her. Take care of things while we're gone, Miss Kane. Safe travels, Mr. Daniels. With the ranch quieter in Ben's absence, Eliza found herself with more time on her hands. She took to exploring the property during the afternoons, admiring the changing colors of autumn in the valley. One day, she discovered a small family graveyard on a hillside overlooking the ranch house. 3 simple markers stood in the fenced enclosure. The largest read, Sarah Daniels' beloved wife, 1854, 1874. Beside it, a smaller stone, Baby Boy Daniels, born and died September 15th, 1874. The third, older marker belonged to Ben's father. Eliza's heart ached for Ben's losses. To come so close to fatherhood only to lose both wife and child in a single day, she couldn't imagine the pain. She returned to the graveyard the next day with wildflowers she'd gathered, placing them on both Sarah's and the baby's graves. As she knelt there, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Miguel, one of the ranch hands, riding toward her. Miss Kane, he called, reining his horse to a stop outside the fence. Been looking for you. Ryder came from town with a letter. Puzzled, Eliza followed Miguel back to the ranch house. The letter was from Martha, inviting her to stay in town for the Harvest Festival if she wished. I can take you Saturday morning, Miguel offered. Need to pick up supplies anyway. Thank you. That would be lovely. Cottonwood Springs was transformed for the Harvest Festival. Colorful bunting decorated the main street, and stalls offered everything from pies to handcrafted goods. Martha greeted Eliza warmly, insisting she stay at her small house rather than the boarding house. Mrs. Wilson might be offended if you didn't at least stop by to say hello, Martha advised as they strolled through the festivities. The landlady seemed genuinely pleased to see Eliza. You're looking well, girl. Ranch life agrees with you. It does, surprisingly. Eliza smiled, though I miss our conversations. Mrs. Wilson nodded, her expression softening. You're always welcome here. Remember that. The day passed pleasantly with Martha introducing Eliza to more townspeople. Unlike her first Sunday in Cottonwood Springs, when she'd been viewed as Edward Kinsley's latest victim, she was now treated with respect as Ben Daniels's housekeeper. The position carried status, she realized, in a community where the Bar D was one of the largest and most successful operations. That evening, as they prepared for the harvest dance, Martha helped arrange Eliza's hair. You should wear the blue dress, she advised. It brings out your eyes. I'm not sure I should attend at all, Eliza demurred. I hardly know anyone. Nonsense. Everyone attends the harvest dance. It's the social event of the season. The dance was held in the newly constructed town hall, decorated with autumn leaves and lit by dozens of lanterns. A small band played lively tunes as couples whirled across the floor. Eliza stood with Martha near the refreshment table, watching the dancers. Several young men approached Martha for dances, and she accepted cheerfully, leaving Eliza alone for stretches of time. She didn't mind. It was pleasant simply to observe the community at leisure. Miss Kane. The deep voice behind her sent an unexpected thrill down her spine. She turned to find Ben Daniels, freshly shaved and dressed in clean clothes, looking somehow both uncomfortable and handsome in the lantern light. "Mr. Daniels, you're back from the cattle drive earlier than expected. Good weather and strong cattle made for quick traveling." He glanced at the dancers, then back to her. "Would you care to dance?" Eliza hesitated only briefly before accepting his outstretched hand. "I'd be delighted." The band was playing a waltz. Ben led her confidently, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. For such a big man, he moved with surprising grace. "I didn't expect to see you here," Eliza admitted. "You arrived back today?" "Late this afternoon. Hank and the boys decided to stay in town tonight. I was planning to head back to the ranch, but then I heard you were here for the festival." "So you stayed for the dance?" His blue eyes held hers. "I stayed for the dance." They moved together in silence for a moment, Eliza acutely aware of his hand at her waist and the subtle scent of soap and leather that surrounded him. "You visited Sarah's grave," he said quietly. "Miguel mentioned you left flowers." Eliza blushed. "I'm sorry if that was presumptuous." "Not at all. It was kind." His voice roughened slightly. "Few people remember them now." "What was she like? Your wife?" A small smile touched his lips. "Stubborn. Brave. She came west with her family when she was 16. We met at a barn raising, married 6 months later." His expression grew distant. "She wanted children so badly. When she finally carried to term, we thought our prayers had been answered." "I'm so sorry, Ben." It was the first time she'd used his given name. His hand tightened slightly on hers. "It was a long time ago," he said softly. "Or sometimes it feels that way." The music ended, and they stepped apart. Ben cleared his throat. "Would you like some punch?" "Yes, thank you." As he went to fetch refreshments, Martha appeared at Eliza's side, eyes dancing with suppressed excitement. Well, well, so much for just a job offer." "It was only a dance," Eliza protested, though her flushed cheeks betrayed her. Hmm. "And the way he looks at you is only the way every unmarried woman in 3 counties wishes a man would look at her." Before Eliza could respond, Ben returned with 2 cups of punch. Martha excused herself with a knowing smile. They spent the remainder of the evening together, dancing twice more and talking during the breaks. Ben introduced her to ranchers from neighboring properties and their wives, who welcomed her warmly. For the first time since arriving in Montana, Eliza felt she might truly belong. As the dance wound down, Ben offered to drive her back to Martha's house in his wagon. "I enjoyed this evening," he said as they traveled the short distance. "I'm not much for social gatherings usually." "Neither am I, but this was lovely." Eliza hesitated, then added, "Thank you for staying in town. I'm glad we had the chance to dance." He pulled the wagon to a stop outside Martha's small house. "I'll be heading back to the ranch at first light. Will you be returning tomorrow or staying another day?" "Tomorrow, if possible. There's bread to bake and washing to do." Ben nodded, seemingly pleased by her answer. "I'll come for you after breakfast." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. "Good night, Eliza." "Good night, Ben." Martha was waiting up, her expression expectant. "Well?" "Well, what? He's taking me back to the ranch tomorrow." Eliza busied herself removing her shawl to hide her flushed cheeks. "And?" "And nothing. We danced. We talked. He was being polite." Martha snorted inelegantly. "Ben Daniels has never in his life danced with a woman to be polite. He barely attends social functions unless it's for business reasons." She studied Eliza's face. "You care for him." It wasn't a question. Eliza sighed, sinking onto a chair. "It doesn't matter if I do. I'm his housekeeper." "You're a respectable, unmarried woman." He's a respectable, unmarried man. There's nothing improper about an attachment forming. It's been barely 6 weeks since Edward Kinsley abandoned me. I'd be a fool to trust my heart again so soon. Martha sat beside her, taking her hand. Edward Kinsley was a con man who preyed on vulnerable women. Ben Daniels is perhaps the most honorable man in the territory. She squeezed Eliza's fingers. Just don't close your heart to the possibility. That's all I'm saying. The journey back to the ranch the next day was quiet but companionable. Ben spoke of the cattle drive, the fair price he'd received for his stock, his plans for expanding the herd next year. Eliza shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her father's bookbinding shop, the illness that had claimed her family. "Is that why you answered Edward's advertisement?" Ben asked. "After losing your family?" Eliza nodded. "There was nothing left for me in Boston. The shop was sold to pay debts after my father's death. I was staying with a distant cousin who made it clear her hospitality had limits." She looked out at the passing landscape. Edward's letters painted such a wonderful picture: a thriving ranch, a comfortable home, a man who wanted a partner, not just a housekeeper. "He's an accomplished liar," Ben said, his voice hardening. "Sheriff Matthews finally got a wire last week. Kinsley's been arrested in Idaho for similar schemes." "Good," Eliza said firmly. "He deserves punishment for what he's done." They crested the final hill before the ranch came into view, golden in the autumn sunlight. Eliza felt a surge of something like homecoming at the sight. "I've been thinking," Ben said suddenly. "Winter's coming. The passes can get snowed in for weeks at a time." "I understand. I've been preparing by putting up preserves and stocking the root cellar." "That's good. Smart." He hesitated. "What I mean is, you might feel isolated. If you'd prefer to take a position in town for the winter months, I'd understand." Eliza studied his profile. "Are you dissatisfied with my work, Mr. Daniels?" "No, not at all." "You've exceeded all expectations." "Then I see no reason to leave, unless you wish me to." He glanced at her, his expression softening. "I don't wish you to leave, Eliza. Quite the opposite." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to articulate fully. Eliza felt her heart quicken. "Then I'll stay." The weeks leading to winter were busy ones on the ranch. Hay needed stacking. Buildings required reinforcement against snow. Food stores had to be laid in. Eliza threw herself into preparations, preserving garden vegetables, baking extra bread to freeze, mending warm clothing for the men. Ben was often in the field from dawn to dusk, but he made a point of speaking with her each evening, sometimes lingering after the other men had retired to the bunkhouse. They would sit by the fire in the main house, talking of books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they still harbored. Gradually, the formality between them eased into something warmer, more comfortable. The first snow fell in early November, transforming the valley into a glittering wonderland. Eliza woke to find the world hushed and white outside her window. She dressed quickly and made her way through ankle-deep snow to the main house to start breakfast. Ben was already there, stoking the fire in the large cook stove. "Morning," he greeted her. "Thought you might appreciate a warm kitchen." "Thank you." She hung her shawl on a peg, touched by his thoughtfulness. As she prepared breakfast, Ben moved about the kitchen with surprising domesticity, setting the table, grinding coffee beans, fetching items from the pantry when asked. "You don't have to help," Eliza protested. "This is my job." "I like helping," he said simply. "Besides, my ma taught me no one's too important to set a table or wash a dish." Their hands brushed as he passed her a bowl, and neither pulled away immediately. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken feeling. A knock at the door broke the spell. Hank entered, stomping snow from his boots. "Morning, boss, Miss Kane." If he noticed the charged atmosphere, he gave no sign. Storms moving in faster than expected. Might want to bring extra firewood to your cabin, miss. The predicted storm arrived with fury that afternoon, wind howling around the buildings and snow falling so thickly it obscured the view from one structure to the next. After serving an early supper, Eliza prepared to brave the short walk to her cabin, wrapping herself in her heaviest shawl. "I'll walk you," Ben insisted, already pulling on his coat. "It's only 100 yards," she protested. "In a whiteout. I'll carry extra wood for your stove." Outside, the wind nearly took her breath away. Ben took her elbow, guiding her through snow already knee-deep in places. They reached her cabin, both gasping from the exertion. Inside, Ben quickly built up the fire while Eliza lit lamps against the early darkness. When the cabin was warm and bright, he straightened, brushing wood chips from his hands. "You should have enough firewood to last the night. If the storm hasn't let up by morning, don't try to make it to the main house. The men and I can fend for ourselves for one meal." "I'll be fine, Ben. I grew up with Boston winters. Montana blizzards are different beasts entirely." He moved to the door reluctantly. "If you need anything, hang a lantern in your window. Someone will be watching." After he left, Eliza stood at the window, watching his broad figure disappear into the swirling snow. The storm raged through the night, rattling windows and moaning around the eaves. She slept fitfully, waking often to add wood to the stove. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Drifts reached halfway up her windows, and a path had been shoveled from her door toward the main house. Through the cleared way trudged Ben, carrying a covered tray. "Thought you might like breakfast in your cabin this morning," he said when she opened the door. The tray held coffee, biscuits, bacon, and eggs, simple fare, but still warm. Eliza was touched by his consideration. "You didn't have to do this. Wanted to make sure you were warm enough." He glanced around the cabin, assessing. "Stove held up well?" "Perfectly adequate. I'm quite cozy." He nodded, seemingly relieved. "Good. That's good." An awkward silence fell between them. Eliza gestured to the tray. "Would you like to join me? There's plenty." "I should get back." "The men?" He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. "Actually, yes. I'd like that." They sat at her small table, sharing the breakfast he'd prepared. Outside, the sun broke through clouds, setting the snow-covered landscape ablaze with diamond brilliance. "It's beautiful," Eliza said, gazing out the window. "Yes," Ben agreed, though his eyes were fixed not on the view but on her face. "Very beautiful." Their gazes met and held. Something shifted between them in that moment, something significant and irreversible. Ben cleared his throat. "Eliza, A shout from outside interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Hank's voice called Ben's name urgently. They both rose and moved to the window to see the foreman trudging through the snow toward the cabin. "Boss, cattle broke through the ice on the North Pond. We need every hand." The crisis consumed the day. 3 steers had wandered onto the frozen pond, cracking the ice and plunging into the frigid water. Saving them required hours of dangerous work with ropes and poles. Eliza kept coffee and hot food flowing, delivering it to the pond where men worked in shifts to prevent hypothermia. By nightfall, 2 steers had been saved, though the third had been lost. The men were exhausted, soaked, and chilled to the bone. Eliza prepared hot baths and warm clothes, tending to minor frostbite and serving hearty stew to restore their strength. Ben was the last to come in, having overseen the final efforts to secure the surviving cattle. His clothes were frozen stiff, his face raw from wind and cold. "You need to get warm immediately," Eliza insisted, ushering him to the chair closest to the kitchen stove. "I've prepared a hot bath in your room." The men are all tended to. Now it's your turn." Too exhausted to argue, he allowed her to help him remove his frozen coat and boots. His hands were so cold they couldn't manage the buttons of his shirt. Without thinking, Eliza began unfastening them for him. She became acutely aware of his proximity, the rise and fall of his chest beneath her fingers, his breath warm against her hair as she bent to her task. When she reached the last button, she looked up to find his eyes dark with an emotion that sent heat coursing through her. "Your bath will get cold," she said softly, stepping back. Ben caught her hand, his fingers now warm against hers. Eliza. Just her name, but the way he said it contained volumes. She understood with sudden clarity that the feeling growing between them was mutual and powerful. "You should rest," she managed to say. "It's been a difficult day." He released her hand reluctantly. "We'll talk tomorrow?" "Yes," she promised. Tomorrow. But tomorrow brought new challenges. The sudden thaw that had weakened the pond ice gave way to another freeze, this one accompanied by howling winds that drove snow into drifts higher than a man's head. The ranch was effectively isolated, all efforts focused on keeping humans and animals alive through the brutal cold. For 2 weeks, the pattern continued. Brief thaws followed by vicious freezes that trapped them in an endless cycle of crisis management. There was little opportunity for private conversation as everyone worked together for survival. Christmas approached with the ranch still gripped by winter's fury. Despite the hardships, Eliza was determined to create some festivity. She secretly sewed gifts for each of the ranch hands, new gloves, mufflers, warm socks, and planned a special Christmas dinner from their dwindling but still adequate supplies. On Christmas Eve, the weather finally granted a reprieve. The wind died, leaving behind a landscape of pristine white under a sky studded with stars. After serving a simple supper, Eliza returned to her cabin to wrap her gifts in scraps of colorful fabric. A knock at her door revealed Ben carrying a small package. "Merry Christmas, Eliza." She invited him in, suddenly shy. "Merry Christmas. Would you like some tea?" "Thank you." He placed the package on her table. "This is for you." "You didn't need to get me anything. It's not much. Just something I thought you might like." They sat with their tea, the cabin warm and intimate in the lamplight. Eliza handed him the package she'd prepared for him, a new scarf she'd knitted from the softest wool she could find. "Your turn," he said, nodding toward his gift. She unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small leather-bound book of poetry, Tennyson's works, the pages gilt-edged and pristine. "Ben, it's beautiful." She ran her fingers reverently over the cover. "Where did you find it?" "Ordered it from Denver months ago. It finally arrived on the last mail run before the big storms." "Months ago?" "But I'd only just arrived then." He smiled, a touch of shyness in his expression. "I had a feeling you'd still be here at Christmas." The realization that he'd been thinking of her, planning for her, so early in their acquaintance touched Eliza deeply. "I hope you don't mind poetry," he continued. "You mentioned once that your father read Tennyson aloud when you were a child." "You remembered that?" She was genuinely surprised. It had been a casual comment during one of their evening conversations. "I remember everything you've told me, Eliza." The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Eliza felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you for the scarf," Ben said, changing the subject. "It's exactly what I needed. I noticed your old one was fraying, and the blue matches your eyes." His smile deepened at her words. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping tea and enjoying the peaceful evening. Finally, Ben spoke. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you, something I've been trying to find the right moment for since before the first storm." Eliza's heart quickened. "Yes?" He took a deep breath. "Your position here as housekeeper, it was only ever meant to be temporary if that's what you wanted. A way for you to get back on your feet after what Kinsley did." "Are you saying you no longer need a housekeeper?" Confusion and hurt mingled in her voice. "No, that's not it at all." Ben set down his teacup and moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Eliza, what I'm trying to say badly is that I don't want you to be my housekeeper anymore. Tears sprang to her eyes. I see. No, you don't. His grip tightened on her hands. I want you to be my wife. The words hung in the air between them. Eliza stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she'd heard. Your wife? Yes. His blue eyes were earnest, vulnerable. I've fallen in love with you, Eliza. I didn't expect it. Didn't plan for it. After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over. But then you came along, with your strength and your dignity even in the worst moment of your life. The way you refused to be broken by what Kinsley did. The way you built a new life here. He paused, his voice roughening. I love watching you with the men, how you've made the ranch feel like a home again. I love our conversations by the fire. I love your smile, your voice, your determination. Eliza's heart felt too full for her chest. Ben, I know it hasn't been long. I know you came here to marry another man. If you need more time, I understand. If your answer is no, I'll respect that, and never mention it again. His hands trembled slightly around hers. But I had to ask. I had to tell you how I feel. Tears spilled onto Eliza's cheeks. When Edward abandoned me that day, and you found me, do you remember what I said? Ben nodded. He broke my hope. And you said, then I'll build it again. She squeezed his hands. You've done exactly that, Ben Daniels. You've helped me build something I never expected to find again, faith in myself, in the future, in love. Hope dawned in his eyes. Is that a yes? It's a yes. She smiled through her tears. I love you too, Ben. I think I have almost from the beginning. He gathered her into his arms, his kiss tender and reverent at first, then deepening with passion long restrained. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I didn't dare hope, Ben admitted, pressing his forehead to hers. I thought surely you'd want to return east eventually, or at least to town. This is my home now, Eliza said simply. You are my home. The ranch hands were unsurprised but delighted by the announcement of their engagement on Christmas Day. Hank admitted later that they'd had a betting pool on when, not if, the boss would propose. Young Jimmy won, he confided to Eliza. He picked Christmas Eve. They were married in the spring, when the last snow had melted and wildflowers carpeted the valley. The entire town turned out for the celebration, held at the ranch under a clear Montana sky. Martha served as Eliza's maid of honor, while Hank stood as Ben's best man. As they exchanged vows beneath an arch of early roses, Eliza thought of the journey that had brought her here, the heartbreak that had led, ultimately, to joy. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ben kissed her with a promise of forever. The ranch thrived in the years that followed. Eliza proved to be not just a wife, but a true partner, bringing order to the household accounts and suggesting innovations that increased their profits. Ben, for his part, never took for granted the second chance at happiness he'd been given. In their third year of marriage, Eliza gave birth to a healthy daughter they named Sarah, after Ben's first wife, a gesture of healing and remembrance. 2 years later, a son joined their family, followed by another daughter. The rooms of the ranch house, once so silent after the tragedy that had claimed Ben's first family, now echoed with children's laughter. On their 10th anniversary, Ben presented Eliza with a surprise, a small library added to the main house, its shelves filled with books he'd been collecting secretly for years. For the woman who brought words back into my life, he said, watching her face light with wonder as she explored the room. That night, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the twilight, Eliza rested her head against Ben's shoulder. Do you ever think about how differently our lives might have turned out? She asked. If Edward hadn't been a liar, if your first wife had lived. Ben's arm tightened around her. Sometimes. But then I remember something my father told me. Life doesn't always give you what you ask for, but sometimes it gives you what you need. He pressed a kiss to her hair. You were what I needed, Eliza. What the ranch needed. What our children needed, even before they existed. And you were what I needed, she replied softly, even when I didn't know it. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and pink, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperate young woman abandoned in a strange territory to the confident ranch wife and mother she had become, it had been a road of unexpected turns. Edward Kinsley, she had learned years ago, eventually received his punishment 5 years in prison for his schemes. The news had barely touched her. So completely had she moved beyond his betrayal. "What are you thinking about?" Ben asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About hope," Eliza said. "About how it can be broken, but never truly destroyed. Not if you find someone willing to help you build it again." Ben's eyes, still as blue and steady as they had been on that first day, met hers with understanding. "I'll always build it with you, Eliza. Every day, for the rest of our lives." As their children raced toward them calling for bedtime stories, Eliza thought, "This is the true dream, the one I didn't even know to wish for." Not the fantasy Edward Kinsley had sold her, but the real, hard-earned joy of a life built with love, honesty, and hope, rebuilt stronger for having once been broken.